Jake Murphy had 3 rules for surviving as a salvage operator in the Kepler Rim. First, never trust a deal that sounds too good to be true. Second, always check your oxygen levels twice before suiting up. And third, absolutely never, under any circumstances, investigate mysterious crying sounds coming from supposedly empty derelict ships. Guess which rule he was about to break. This is exactly how horror vids start, Jake muttered into his helmet comm as he drifted toward the twisted wreckage of what used to be a mid-range cargo hauler. The ship hung in space like a broken toy, its hull split open in 3 places and leaking atmosphere in lazy, glittering streams. Next thing you know, some tentacle monster jumps out and makes me miss lunch. His salvage ship, the Rusty Bucket, which despite its name was only moderately rusty, held position 50 meters away. The ship's AI, Martha, crackled through his earpiece with her usual cheerful pessimism. Jake, I'm detecting organic life signs aboard that vessel. Small ones. Also, structural integrity is at 12% and falling. I give it maybe 2 hours before complete hull failure. Great, just great. Jake fired his maneuvering thrusters, closing the distance to the nearest breach. Why couldn't it be a nice quiet salvage job? Maybe some abandoned mining equipment or a load of luxury goods nobody reported missing. The crying sound came again, echoing through the comm frequency. It was definitely organic, definitely young, and definitely not supposed to be there. Jake's conscience, which he'd spent years trying to ignore, started making uncomfortable noises in the back of his mind. You know, Martha said conversationally, statistically speaking, 93% of salvage operators who investigate distress calls end up either dead, broke, or married to someone completely inappropriate for their lifestyle. Thanks for the pep talk. Jake maneuvered through the hull breach, his suit lights cutting through the darkness inside. The ship's gravity was shot, leaving debris floating in lazy spirals. And what's the other 7%? They become heroes, but that's largely considered a statistical anomaly. The cargo hold was a mess of scattered containers and twisted metal. Jake followed the sound, pushing off bulkheads and dodging floating wreckage. The crying was coming from behind a stack of overturned supply crates near the back wall. Hello? Jake called out, feeling ridiculous. Anyone back there? The crying stopped abruptly. Jake pulled himself around the crates and immediately understood why his day was about to get infinitely more complicated. Huddled in a makeshift shelter of emergency blankets was a small alien child, maybe 4 feet tall, with bright blue skin and enormous golden eyes that were currently staring at him with a mixture of terror and hope. Oh, come on, Jake groaned. Really? A kid? The universe couldn't just give me a nice simple salvage run. No, it had to throw in an orphaned alien child for maximum emotional manipulation. The little alien said something in a language that sounded like musical hiccup. She? Jake was pretty sure it was a she based on the tiny voice pointed at herself and made more musical sounds. Right. Of course you don't speak standard. Jake activated his suit's translation matrix, which immediately started making confused beeping noises. Martha, a little help here. Translation matrix is having difficulties. The child appears to be speaking a dialect of Zephyrian. But she's very young and using simplified grammar. I think she's trying to tell you her name. The child pointed at herself again and said very carefully. Pip. Pip. Okay, that's a... Jake looked around the makeshift shelter. There were emergency rations, a small water recycler, and what looked like a child's toy, a small stuffed creature with too many eyes. Where's your family, Pip? The golden eyes filled with tears, and she pointed toward the front of the ship. Then she made a throat-cutting gesture that was disturbingly universal across species. Ah, sorry kid. Jake's stomach dropped. Pirates, most likely. They'd taken whatever was valuable and left the ship to die in space. Standard operating procedure, except they'd missed one very small passenger. How long have you been here? Pip held up 3 fingers, then seemed to think about it and added 2 more. 5 days? Jake did some quick math. The ship's emergency power was nearly gone, life support was failing, and she'd been surviving on emergency rations meant for adults. She should have been dead already. Tough little thing, Martha observed. Heart rate and respiration suggest she's malnourished but stable. Though that won't last much longer without proper medical attention. Jake stared at the kid, who stared back with those impossibly large eyes. She was small enough to fit in his cargo hold, wouldn't eat much, and finding her a safe place to live couldn't be that hard, right? This is a terrible idea, he said out loud. Pip tilted her head, not understanding the words but apparently recognizing the tone of someone about to do something stupid but necessary. I mean, I'm a salvage operator, not a babysitter. I don't know anything about kids, especially alien kids. I live on a ship that's held together with duct tape and prayer. My idea of a balanced meal is adding hot sauce to ration bars. Pip's lower lip started to tremble. And now you're going to cry again, aren't you? Great. Perfect. Jake rubbed his helmet faceplate in frustration. Martha, how much trouble are we talking about here? Well, harboring unregistered aliens is technically illegal in 17 sectors. Plus, whoever killed her family might come looking for loose ends. On the positive side, she's small enough that the additional life support costs will be negligible. Jake looked at Pip again. She'd wrapped herself in the emergency blanket and was clutching the stuffed creature like it was the only thing keeping her sane. Which, considering her circumstances, it probably was. Fine, Jake said, knowing he was about to make the worst decision of his life. But we're finding you a proper home as soon as possible. I'm not running a charity here. Pip didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Her face lit up with the first smile Jake had seen since boarding the wreck. Yeah? Don't get too excited, Jake muttered, but he was already thinking about how to modify his cargo hold for a passenger. Martha. Plot a course for Nexus Station. They've got family services there. Course plotted. Estimated travel time, 6 hours. Jake. What? You realize this is exactly how those statistical anomalies start, right? Jake scooped up Pip, who weighed about as much as a bag of tools, and started making his way back to the breach. Just fly the ship, Martha. But as they headed back to the rusty bucket, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that his nice, simple life had just gotten infinitely more complicated. Getting Pip settled in the rusty bucket turned out to be an exercise in creative problem-solving and mild panic. Jake had hastily cleared out a storage compartment and rigged up a makeshift bed using cargo netting and emergency cushions. Pip seemed thrilled with the arrangement, which only made Jake feel worse about his complete lack of childcare qualifications. Okay, kid, Jake said, pulling up a nutrition bar and a water pouch. This is all I've got that might not poison you. Martha, run a bioscan and tell me if any of our food will kill her. Scanning now. Good news, Jake. Her species has remarkably similar dietary requirements to humans. Bad news. Those nutrition bars taste like cardboard mixed with sadness, and even alien children have taste buds. Pip took a tentative bite of the nutrition bar, made a face that transcended species barriers, but gamely kept chewing. She pointed to herself again and said, Pip, then pointed to Jake with a questioning chirp. Jake, he said, pointing to himself. Jake Murphy, professional salvage operator and apparently accidental alien babysitter. Jake, Pip repeated carefully, her pronunciation turning the J into something softer. Jake, good man. Save Pip. Oh great. Now she thinks I'm a good person. Jake slumped into his pilot's seat while Pip explored her new surroundings with the fearless curiosity of a 4-year-old. Martha, what's our ETA to Nexus Station? 5 hours, 43 minutes. Jake, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the small blue alien child in our cargo hold. What about her? I've been monitoring local communication channels. There are reports of Crack's syndicate ships in this sector. 3 merchant vessels have gone missing in the past week. Jake's blood ran cold. The Crack's syndicate was bad news with a capital everything. They specialized in slavery, smuggling, and generally making life miserable for anyone who crossed their paths. If they were the ones who killed Pip's family, they're probably long gone by now, Jake said, trying to convince himself as much as Martha. Pirates hit and run. They don't stick around. Perhaps. But Jake, I've been analyzing the attack patterns on that ship. This wasn't a typical piracy operation. They were looking for something specific. Pip wandered over to Jake's chair and tugged on his sleeve. When he looked down, she was holding up her stuffed creature, which, now that Jake got a better look at it, wasn't actually a toy. It was some kind of tech device shaped like an animal, with small ports and what looked like processing nodes built into its fuzzy exterior. Jake, Pip said seriously, Mama say hide Blinky. Very important, hide Blinky. Martha, please tell me that's not what I think it is. Scan. Oh Jake, that's not a toy. That's a Zephyrian neural interface device. Extremely advanced, extremely valuable and extremely illegal in most sectors. Jake stared at the innocent-looking stuffed creature. Let me guess, the Cracks weren't just raiding random ships. They were looking for this thing. It would appear so. Zephyrian neural interfaces are rumored to enhance cognitive abilities exponentially. In the wrong hands, they could be used to break encryption, control automated systems, or worse. And they probably think Pip knows how to use it. Jake rubbed his face. This just keeps getting better. Martha, change course. We're not going to Nexus Station. Why? Where are we going? Anywhere that isn't crawling with Crack's sympathizers. Nexus Station does a lot of business with fringe element. If word gets out that we've got what they're looking for, Jake, I hate to interrupt this moment of strategic thinking, but we have a problem. 3 ships just dropped out of hyperspace behind us. Configuration matches Crack's syndicate vessel. Jake's heart rate spiked as he spun to check the sensors. 3 sleek, predatory ships were closing fast, their weapon systems already charging. How did they find us so quickly? Unknown, but they're broadcasting on standard frequencies. Would you like me to put them through? Do I have a choice? The communication channel crackled to life, and a voice like gravel in a blender filled the cockpit. Human vessel. This is Commander Thork of the Cracks Syndicate. You have something that belongs to us. Surrender the child and the device, and your death will be quick. Jake looked at Pip, who had gone very still. She clutched Blinky tighter and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Counteroffer, Jake said into the comm. How about you go find someone else to bother? I'm having a really bad day and I'd hate to make it worse by doing something we'd all regret. Thork's laugh was like metal scraping against concrete. Amusing. You humans always think you're clever, but you're outgunned, outmanned and out of luck. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Martha. Options? Well, we could surrender and hope they kill us quickly. We could run and hope they don't catch us. Or we could fight 3 military-grade ships with our salvage vessel, that's armed with exactly 1 defensive laser cannon and your charming personality. When you put it like that, it sounds hopeless. It is hopeless, Jake. But then again, you've never been particularly good at accepting reality. Jake looked at Pip again. She was scared, but there was something else in those golden eyes. Trust. She trusted him to figure this out, to keep her safe. It was the kind of trust that made smart people do incredibly stupid things. Pip, Jake said gently, hold on to something. This is going to get bumpy. He slammed the throttle forward, throwing the rusty bucket into a sharp turn that made the hull groan in protest. The Cracks ships immediately gave chase, their superior speed closing the gap quickly. Jake, what's the plan? I'm working on it. Jake dodged the first volley of plasma fire, using an asteroid field to break line of sight. Pip, does Blinky do anything useful? Like, say, disable enemy ship? Pip shook her head sadly. Blinky only for learning. Mama say Pip too little for big functions. Great. So we've got the galaxy's most wanted educational toy. Jake pulled the ship into a spiraling dive between 2 massive asteroids. Martha, how's our fuel situation? Fuel is fine. Structural integrity is becoming a concern. Also, Jake, I should mention that running away from our problems has never actually solved anything. Yeah, well, there's a first time for everything. The Cracks ship split up, trying to flank them. Jake realized with growing dread that they weren't just randomly searching. They knew exactly where he was going. Someone had leaked their route, or worse, the Cracks had inside information on his ship's capabilities. Jake, Pip said quietly, tugging on his sleeve again. Pip, have idea? Maybe Blinky help little bit. Jake glanced at her, then at the approaching enemy ships. What kind of help? Pip pressed her small hand against Blinky's surface, and the device suddenly came alive with soft blue lights. Blinky can talk to other machines. Tell them, wrong thing. You mean it can hack their systems? Hack? Pip looked confused by the word. Blinky just makes friends, makes them confused. Jake grinned for the first time since this whole mess started. Martha, can you interface with Pip's device? Attempting connection now. Jake, this is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's not hacking in the traditional sense. It's more like digital empathy. The device can communicate with other AI systems and convince them to cooperate. Can it convince 3 Cracks warships to leave us alone? Let's find out. Pip pressed both hands against Blinky, her face scrunched up in concentration. The device pulsed with brighter lights, and suddenly the pursuing ship's formation began to wobble. What's happening to them? Jake asked, watching their pursuers start flying in increasingly erratic patterns. Near as I can tell, Martha said with something approaching admiration, their navigation systems are now convinced they're flying through a nursery rhyme. Their weapons are trying to fire flower petals, and their communication array thinks it's a musical instrument. Jake watched in amazement as the 3 Cracks ships began spinning in lazy circles, their crews presumably screaming at control panels that were no longer responding to logic. Pip, Jake said, remind me never to get on your bad side. But as they pulled away from the confused enemy ships, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just painted a very large target on their backs. The Cracks now knew exactly what they were dealing with, and Commander Thork didn't sound like the type to give up easily. Martha, plot a course for the Outer Rim, somewhere with no law enforcement, no syndicate presence, and preferably no people at all. Such a place exists, Jake, but I feel obligated to point out that isolated locations are where most horror stories reach their climax. Yeah, well, Jake said, watching Pip carefully put Blinky back to sleep mode. Something tells me our horror story is just getting started.
2 days of running had taught Jake several important lessons about life with an alien child. First, Pip had the energy of a caffeinated squirrel and the curiosity of a detective with abandonment issues. Second, she seemed to view every mechanical system on his ship as a potential friend to chat with through Blinky. And third, having someone depend on him for survival was doing terrible things to his carefully cultivated cynicism. Jake, why does Foodmaker angry at Pip? She asked, pointing at the galley unit that had been making increasingly hostile beeping noises since she'd tried to help it prepare breakfast. Because you asked it to make rainbow soup, and our food processor wasn't built for creative interpretation, Jake replied, manually overriding the unit's confused protests. Martha, please explain to our kitchen that we don't actually have rainbow-flavored anything. I've been trying, Jake, but apparently Blinky convinced it that imagination is a valid ingredient. The processor is now having an existential crisis about the nature of flavor. Jake rubbed his temples. Great. Add that to the list of things I never thought I'd have to deal with. Right after alien child with reality-warping technology and homicidal space pirates with a grudge. As if summoned by his complaint, the proximity alarm started shrieking. Jake spun to the sensor display where 4 new contacts had just appeared at the edge of scanner range. The distinctive energy signatures left no doubt about their identity. Cracks, ships, Martha announced with her usual cheerful pessimism. 4 this time. They're learning, Jake. How are they tracking us? Jake demanded, throwing himself into the pilot's seat. We've been jumping randomly for 2 days. No patterns, no predictable routes. Unknown. But Jake, I'm detecting something interesting about their approach vector. They're not trying to intercept us directly. They're hurting us. Jake studied the tactical display and his stomach dropped. The 4 ships were positioned to cut off escape routes, forcing him toward a specific vector. They're pushing us towards something. Martha, what's in that direction? Scanning. Oh, that's not good. Define not good. There's a massive debris field ahead. Remains of an old battlefield from the sector wars. Hundreds of wrecked ships, unstable power sources, and enough interference to block most scanner readings. Perfect place for an ambush. Jake muttered. He looked back at Pip, who was trying to comfort the still confused food processor by patting its control panel. Pip, come strap yourself in. We're about to get creative. She bounced over to the co-pilot seat Jake had rigged with makeshift restraints, sized for someone much smaller than the average humanoid. Jake, make bad men go away again. That's the plan. Jake fired the engines, angling toward the debris field instead of away from Martha. They want to trap us in there. Let's give them what they want. Jake, that's suicide. We'll be flying blind in a field of explosive debris while being hunted by ships specifically designed for combat. Yeah. But here's the thing about Crack's tactics. They rely on superior firepower and intimidation. They're not used to prey that fights back smart instead of hard. The rusty bucket plunged into the debris field, immediately surrounded by the twisted remains of ancient battle. Broken hull plates the size of buildings drifted past the viewports, while the ship's radiation shielding whined under the strain of filtering out exotic particles from long-dead reactors. Contact, Martha announced. The Crack's ships are following us. They're maintaining formation, sweeping methodically. Jake nodded, threading the ship between 2 massive engine sections that hung in space like metal mountains. They're treating this like a standard search and destroy. Textbook syndicate tactics. And that's bad for them, because textbooks don't account for desperate humans with nothing to lose and a really unhealthy attachment to improvised solutions. Jake killed the engines, letting momentum carry them deeper into the debris field. The ship went silent except for life support systems, drifting like just another piece of wreckage among thousands of others. Passive sensors only, Jake whispered, as if the Cracks could hear him across the vacuum. Let them come to us. Pip had gone very quiet, pressing Blinky against her chest. The device was glowing softly, and Jake realized she was using it to monitor the approaching ships. Pip, see bad men, she whispered. 4 ships, getting closer. Leader very angry. Can Blinky do the confusion trick again? Pip shook her head sadly. Too far. Blinky need be close to make friends with machines. Then we'll get close. Jake waited until the Crack's ships had spread out, their search pattern bringing them deeper into the debris maze. Martha, identify the command ship. The largest vessel, leading the formation. Distinctive energy signature suggests it's Commander Thork's personal ship. Jake grinned, feeling the familiar rush of a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Perfect. Pip, when I tell you, I want you to make friends with that ship's computer. But not the nice kind of friends, the kind of friends who play practical jokes. Pip understand, make machines silly, like Food Maker. The command ship drifted closer, its sensor beams sweeping through the debris. Jake waited until it passed directly overhead, then fired the engines at full power, rocketing upward from their hiding spot among the wreckage. Surprise, Jake muttered, bringing them alongside the much larger vessel before its crew could react. Pip pressed both hands against Blinky, her face screwed up in concentration. The device blazed with blue light, and immediately the Crack's ship began behaving like it had developed a severe case of mechanical hiccups. Their weapons are trying to fire confetti, Martha reported with something approaching glee. Their shields think they're decorative party balloons. And their navigation system is convinced it's piloting a carousel. The command ship began spinning slowly, its confused crew presumably scrambling to regain control. Jake used the chaos to dart back into the debris field, but not before he opened a communication channel. "Commander Thork," Jake said cheerfully. "This is Jake Murphy aboard the salvage vessel you've been chasing. I just wanted to let you know that your ship's computer thinks it's at a birthday party. You might want to look into." Thork's response was a string of what Jake assumed were extremely creative curses in several alien languages. "Also," Jake continued, "I don't know what you want with the kid, but it's not happening. Find someone else to bull. You cannot run forever, human," Thork snarled through the static-filled channel. "The child possesses technology that belongs to the Syndicate. We will hunt you to the edge of the galaxy if necessary. Good luck with that. Oh, and you might want to check your ship's party planning protocols. I think they're stuck in a loop." Jake cut the channel and pushed deeper into the debris field. Behind them, the command ship was still spinning helplessly while the other 3 Cracks vessels tried to provide assistance without getting caught in the same digital confusion. "That was incredibly satisfying," Martha observed, "but also probably very stupid. You've just made this It was already personal the moment they killed Pip's family." Jake glanced back at the little alien, who was slumped in her seat, exhausted from using Blinky's abilities. "Besides, running away forever isn't really an option. They'll just keep coming. So what's the plan?" Jake looked out at the debris field surrounding them, the graveyard of ships that had fought and died in a war most people had forgotten. Somewhere in this mess were weapons, supplies, and maybe even functional vessels that could give them an edge. "The plan is we stop running and start fighting back. But first we're going shopping." "Shopping? All this beautiful junk floating around? There's got to be something we can use." Jake patted Pip's shoulder gently. "Get some rest. When you wake up we're going to teach these Cracks idiots why humans are really bad at accepting defeat." Pip mumbled something in her own language and curled up in the co-pilot seat, still clutching Blinky. She looked so small and vulnerable that Jake felt something fierce and protective twist in his chest. He'd spent years avoiding attachments, complications, and anything that might make him care about someone other than himself. But looking at Pip sleeping peacefully despite everything she'd been through, Jake realized it was already too late. The Cracks had made a serious mistake. They'd hurt a kid, and now they were threatening her again. And there was one thing every species in the galaxy should have learned by now about humans. We really don't like it when someone hurts our family. "Martha, start scanning for salvageable weapons and intact power sources. It's time to show these pirates what desperate humans are capable of." "Jake, I feel obligated to point out that this plan has a very low probability of success." "Yeah, well," Jake said, watching the Cracks ships regroup in the distance. "The universe has been underestimating humans for a long time. Maybe it's time we reminded everyone why that's a mistake."
Jake's brilliant plan to turn the tables on the Cracks lasted exactly 47 minutes before it went spectacularly wrong. "I can't believe you fell for the oldest trick in the book," Martha said as Jake stared at the dozen Cracks soldiers surrounding his ship at the supply depot. "Convenient abandoned outpost with exactly the supplies we need? Really, Jake?" "In my defense," Jake muttered, hands raised as the soldiers gestured aggressively with their plasma rifles. "I was hoping the universe would cut me a break just this once." Commander Thork emerged from the shadows. His reptilian features twisted in what Jake assumed was supposed to be a smile. The Cracks leader was taller than expected, with cybernetic implants covering half his face and an attitude that screamed professional sadist. "Humans," Thork said conversationally, "always so predictable. You need supplies so you go to supply depots. You need fuel so you seek fuel stations. Your species thinks in such straight lines. Yeah, well, your species thinks torture is a hobby, so nobody's perfect." Jake glanced toward the ship, where Pip was hopefully still hidden in the smuggling compartment he'd rigged up. "What do you want, Thork?" "I want the child. More specifically, I want what the child can do." Thork circled Jake like a predator sizing up prey. "Do you know what Zephyrians are, human? Small, blue, and apparently really good at making your ships think they're party decorations." Thork's laugh was like grinding metal. "Zephyrians are living computers. Their brains interface directly with quantum system. That child isn't just carrying advanced technology, she is advanced technology." Jake felt his blood run cold. "She's a kid, you psychopath. She's a weapon, a tool. With proper conditioning she could break any encryption, control any system, reshape reality through pure computational will." Thork's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on Jake. "The Syndicate has been hunting her species to extinction for exactly this purpose. Over my dead body. That can be arranged." The sound of small feet running across metal deck plates made everyone turn. Pip appeared in the ship's doorway, clutching Blinky and looking absolutely terrified. "Jake?" she called out in a tiny voice. "Bad men hurt Jake?" "Pip, get back inside," Jake called, but it was too late. Thork had spotted her. "There she is," Thork purred. "Come here, little one. Don't be afraid." Pip took one look at Thork's cybernetic face and started crying, but instead of backing away she pressed both hands against Blinky and the device began glowing like a small star.
Fascinating, Thork said. Even untrained, she's instinctively accessing quantum processing layers. Imagine what we could accomplish with the right motivation. You're talking about a 4-year-old child, Jake said, slowly edging toward the ship. I'm talking about the future of warfare. One Zephyrian child could control an entire fleet. She could rewrite the defensive protocols of any planet. She could make weapons think they're flowers or turn shielding systems into soap bubbles. Jake realized with growing horror that Thork wasn't just after Pip for revenge or profit. This was about turning her into a living weapon of mass destruction. Pip, Jake said carefully, remember what I taught you about strangers. Strangers, not friends. Pip said through her tears. Strangers maybe want hurt Pip. That's right. And what do we do when strangers want to hurt us? Pip's golden eyes met Jake's, and he saw understanding flash in them. We make them very sorry. She pressed her hands harder against Blinky, and suddenly every piece of electronic equipment in the depot began behaving like it had developed a severe case of artificial dementia. Lights strobed in rainbow patterns, doors opened and closed randomly, and the crack soldiers' weapons started playing what sounded like nursery rhymes. Now would be good, Pip, Jake yelled, diving toward the ship as chaos erupted around them. But Pip was already moving, her small size letting her dart between confused soldiers while their equipment rebelled against them. She made it to Jake just as Thork roared orders at his troops. Forget the equipment. Take them alive. Jake scooped up Pip and sprinted for the ship, but something hard slammed into his back. He went down, rolling to protect Pip as crack soldiers swarmed them. Jake? Pip screamed, pressing Blinky against the nearest soldier's arm. The alien immediately began dancing uncontrollably as his suit's systems convinced him he was at a very energetic party. But there were too many of them. Jake found himself pinned to the ground while Pip was pulled away, still clutching Blinky and trying to make every piece of technology in sight rebel against its programming. Enough, Thork said, producing a device that emitted a high-pitched whine. Blinky's lights immediately dimmed, and Pip collapsed. Unconscious. Neural suppressor, Thork explained to Jake's horrified expression. Can't have her reshaping reality while we're trying to have a conversation. Jake struggled against his captors. But the odds were hopeless. If you hurt her, I won't hurt her. I'll train her. Condition her. Turn her into exactly what the Syndicate needs. Thork picked up the unconscious Pip with surprising gentleness. She'll thank me eventually. Children adapt so quickly to new circumstances. You're insane. I'm practical. The galaxy is changing, human. Technology is evolving beyond what most species can comprehend. Those who control the next generation of quantum consciousness will control everything else. Jake watched helplessly as Thork carried Pip toward his ship. The little alien who'd trusted him, who'd called him a good man, who'd made his cold, empty life suddenly worth something. Martha, Jake subvocalized, hoping his comm implant was still active. Please tell me you have a plan. Working on it, Jake. But I should warn you, the statistical probability of success is approaching 0. Yeah. Well, Jake said, testing the restraints holding him down. Humans have never been particularly good at math. As Thork's ship powered up for departure, Jake stared at the stars and made a promise. They could take him prisoner, they could torture him, they could do whatever they wanted. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd hurt his family, and humans, as the galaxy was about to learn, took that sort of thing very, very personal. Jake had been tied up in the Crack's detention cell for exactly 3 hours, which was approximately 2 hours and 59 minutes longer than his patience typically lasted. You know what your problem is, Thork, Jake called out to the empty corridor. You assume everyone thinks like you do. Logical. Predictable. Following the rules. Martha's voice crackled through his barely functioning comm implant. Jake, I've accessed the ship's systems. Pip is in the command center, still unconscious. Thork is attempting to interface her with their quantum navigation array. Over my dead body. Jake had been working on his restraints since they'd locked him up, using a technique he'd learned from a very unpleasant experience with asteroid pirates. The energy cuffs were designed to contain typical humanoid strength, not human stubbornness mixed with parental rage. Martha, can you cause a distraction? Already on it. I've been making friends with their waste management system. In 3 minutes, every toilet on this ship is going to experience what I like to call a cascading failure event. That's my girl. The ship's alarm system started howling as Jake felt his restraints finally give way. Apparently, Crack's engineering hadn't accounted for humans being willing to dislocate their own thumbs to escape captivity. Jake slipped out of the detention area just as Crack's soldiers began running toward various plumbing emergencies. The command center was 3 decks up. According to the ship's schematics Martha had helpfully downloaded to his visual implant. Pip. Hang on, Jake muttered, improvising weapons from maintenance supplies as he moved. A plasma torch here. Some industrial adhesive there. And a few power cells that were definitely not supposed to be wired together like that. He found Pip exactly where Martha had said she'd be. Unconscious in a chair surrounded by quantum interface equipment that looked disturbingly medical. Thork was standing over her, adjusting settings on a control panel. "Step away from the kid," Jake said, pointing his improvised plasma cutter at the crack's commander. Thork turned slowly, his cybernetic eye whirring. Impressive escape, human. But pointless. The integration process has already begun. In a few hours she'll be completely under syndicate control. Yeah. See. Here's the thing about humans, Jake said conversationally. We don't accept pointless as an answer. We're really bad at knowing when to quit. Your weapon cannot penetrate my armor. This isn't about the weapon. Jake smiled. And it wasn't a nice expression. It's about what happens when you threaten someone's family. Jake threw the plasma cutter at Thork's face. Not to hurt him but to distract him while simultaneously triggering the improvised explosive he'd cobbled together from power cells. The blast knocked Thork backward and shorted out half the command center systems. In the chaos, Jake reached Pip and yanked the neural suppressor away from her head. Her golden eyes snapped open immediately. "Jake," she gasped. Then saw Thork getting back to his feet. "Bad man, hurt Pip's brain. Not anymore, he won't." Jake scooped her up. "Pip, can Blinky make this whole ship very, very confused?" "Pip, try." She pressed both hands against Blinky, and the device blazed with angry blue light. Immediately the ship's systems began rebelling in ways that defied several laws of physics. Gravity reversed itself in random sections, the life support system started producing rainbow-colored air, and the weapons systems began firing birthday presents instead of plasma bolts. "You cannot escape," Thork snarled, advancing despite the chaos. "I will hunt you across the galaxy." "See, that's where you made your mistake," Jake said, backing toward the emergency airlock with Pip in his arms. "You threatened my kid. And humans? We hold grudges forever." Jake triggered the emergency release on his improvised explosive device. Not the one he'd used before, but the much bigger one he'd planted in the ship's main reactor during his escape. He'd given them exactly 30 seconds to reach the escape pods. "Martha, please tell me you've got the rusty bucket ready for pickup." "Already docked with the escape pod bay, Jake. Though I should mention that turning a Krax dreadnought into a fireworks display is going to make you very popular with law enforcement. I'll worry about that later." Jake strapped Pip into an escape pod as the ship shuddered around them. "Right now, I've got a promise to keep." They launched just as the dreadnought's reactor went critical, taking Commander Thork and his dreams of quantum warfare with it. Jake watched through the pod's viewport as the explosion lit up space like a miniature star. "Jake," Pip said quietly. "Bad man gone?" "Yeah, kid. Bad man's gone." Jake pulled her close as Martha's ship moved to collect them. "And if any more bad men show up, they'll learn the same lesson Thork just did." "What lesson?" Jake smiled, feeling something fierce and protective settle permanently in his chest. "That humans really don't like it when someone messes with their family." Pip giggled and hugged Blinky tight. "Pip, like being Jake's family." "Yeah. Well," Jake said, watching the debris field that used to be their biggest problem. "Get used to it, kid. Because you're stuck with me now." Martha's voice crackled through the comm with dry amusement. "Jake, I hate to interrupt this touching moment, but we have 17 more Krax ships incoming. Apparently you've made quite an impression." Jake laughed, surprising himself. "Good. Let them come. They want a war with humans. They just got one." 3 weeks later, Jake was beginning to understand why most people didn't accidentally adopt alien children with reality warping technology. "Pip, what did you do to the navigation computer?" Jake asked, staring at the star chart that was now displaying what appeared to be a child's drawing of a purple dragon eating ice cream. "Pip, make it pretty," she announced proudly from her newly installed co-pilot seat. "Nav computer very sad. Always showing boring stars, now showing happy stars." "Martha, please tell me we're not actually flying toward a purple dragon." "We're not, Jake, though I admit the destination coordinates now translate to where the happy ice cream lives." Martha's voice carried that special tone reserved for electronic beings who'd given up on logic. "I've learned to work around Pip's creative interpretations." Jake rubbed his temples. The rusty bucket had been upgraded with salvaged Krax technology, making it faster and better armed. But apparently no ship in the galaxy was designed to handle a 4-year-old who could convince computers to express themselves artistically. "The good news," Martha continued, "is that 17 more Krax ships mysteriously suffered complete system failures this week. Apparently their computers all decided to become poets simultaneously. And the bad news, we're now wanted by the Krax Syndicate, the Galactic Trade Authority. 3 different pirate factions, and something called the Committee for Responsible AI Development. Jake looked at Pip, who was teaching Blinky to make the ship's lights flash in rainbow patterns. She'd grown in the past few weeks, not physically but in confidence. The scared little alien he'd found crying in a derelict ship was gone, replaced by a happy kid who treated every day like an adventure. "Jake," Pip said, looking up from her light show. Pip have question. "What's that, sweetheart? Why humans so good at making bad people go away?" Jake considered this seriously. It was a fair question from someone who'd watched him turn a Krax dreadnought into scrap metal. "I guess it's because humans are really bad at accepting things we don't like. When someone hurts our family, we don't just get mad. We get creative." Pip liked creative. She grinned, showing off the gap where she'd lost her first tooth the week before. Jake had saved it in a little box. Because apparently space dads did things like that. Pip helped Jake be more creative. "Yeah, I've noticed." Jake glanced at the weapons console, which was currently displaying smiley faces instead of targeting data. "Just try to keep the creativity focused on bad guys, okay? Pip promise. Only make bad people's computers silly." Jake's comm system chimed with an incoming message. The sender ID made him grin. It was Captain Rodriguez of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike, thanking them for mysteriously causing the pirates who'd been extorting her shipping route to suffer simultaneous navigation failure. "Martha, how many thank you messages is that this week?" 47. Apparently word is spreading that there's a ghost ship causing criminal organizations to experience technical difficulties. "You're becoming something of a folk hero, Jake." "Great. That's exactly what I wanted. A reputation." Pip bounced in her seat. Pip and Jake famous. Like story heroes. Story heroes don't usually have to worry about fuel costs and ship maintenance, Jake pointed out, but he was smiling. The truth was, he'd never been happier. His life was complicated, dangerous, and completely unpredictable, but it was also full of laughter, adventure, and the kind of purpose he'd never known he was missing. "Jake," Pip said seriously. Pip loved new family. "Yeah, kid," Jake replied, reaching over to ruffle her blue hair. "Me too." The proximity alarm chimed softly, indicating another ship requesting communication. Jake checked the ID and groaned. "Martha, please tell me that's not another crack squadron." "Worse, Jake. It's the Galactic Child Services Bureau. Apparently someone reported that you're traveling with an unregistered minor." Jake looked at Pip, who was now making the ship's external lights spell out curse words in 17 different languages. "Any suggestion?" "Well," Martha said thoughtfully, "we could try explaining that she's not technically a minor since her species ages differently, that she's safer with us than in any government facility, and that she's essentially a living weapon of mass destruction who thinks bureaucrats are funny. Or, we run. Again." Jake fired up the engines, grinning as the stars wheeled around them. "Pip, strap in. Time for another adventure." "Yay." Pip loved adventures with Jake. As they jumped to hyperspace, leaving very confused government officials behind, Jake reflected on how much his life had changed. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a simple salvage operator with no attachments and no complications. Now he was a space dad, outlaw hero, and apparently the galaxy's most wanted babysitter. "Martha, plot a course for the Outer Rim, somewhere with no law enforcement, no bureaucrats, and hopefully no people who want to turn children into weapons." Course plotted Jake. "Though I should warn you, our reputation is starting to precede us. Half the galaxy thinks we're heroes, and the other half wants us dead." "Perfect," Jake said, watching Pip make their hyperspace tunnel flash in cheerful colors. Wouldn't want life to get boring. And as they flew toward whatever chaos awaited them next, Jake couldn't help but smile. He'd spent years running from responsibility, from attachment, from anything that might make his life complicated. It had taken a small blue alien with reality warping technology to teach him that some complications were worth keeping, even if they did make his navigation computer think it was an artist.